Hello, welcome to another episode of Drinking with Comics. I'm Sean, and back this week to talk about my picks from New Comic Book Day and something from last week that really blew me away. Let's start with this week's. Actually, no, let's start with the beer. So first, and I already drank this last night, my neighbor Vince once again returned from his travels and brought me Silver Spruce Brewing's Stout. Badass. Um, ABV is 6.0, born on 9/8. Very, very good stout. I'm a big fan of crowlers. Love it. A lot of local breweries do crowlers, which, if you don't know, is like a growler, but in a can. And, speaking of cans, it's funny. Back in like 2014, when we would do this show, I remember the first time I saw Sierra Nevada, which is my go to beer, pop up in cans. And I was like, oh, wow, cool, analog novelty. And most beer was still in bottles. And really, over the last couple of years, I've noticed it's almost impossible to find bottled beer unless you're drinking macro brews and not interested. So I'm always on the lookout for bottled beer. And I actually traveled to East Tennessee this past weekend, and I found something in a bottle. I picked up some for both me and my neighbor, and I'm going to try this for the first time right here. This is O'Fallon Dad's Original Oatmeal Stout. This is Dad's Cookie Company. I don't know anything about this, but I had to try it. It doesn't look like something I drink all night. It looks like one of those kind of one and done. It's barely 6 o'clock. I don't normally even crack a beer till probably 6:37. But for you, dear viewers, here we go. Got my trusty butterfly knife bottle opener. Can't really get the proper nose from a bottle, but let's see what we got here once we pour this fucker out. Oh, shit. Oatmeal cookie, indeed. Wow. That is definitely what you get if you drop an oatmeal cookie in your stout and leave it for quite a while. Man, this is great. So O'Fallon, really, really, there's not a lot of information on here. O'FallonBrewery.com, St. Louis County, Maryland Heights, Missouri. Product of the USA. Old timey label, delicious. So let's do one more of these and we'll get into the comics. Oh man, wow. We're going to start with Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino, Dave Stewart's Tenement. This is the third iteration or the third book in the Bone Orchard mythos. And this is the one. So we had The Passageway, which was an original hardcover graphic novel. Then we had 10,000 Black Feathers, which was a 5 or 6 issue series. My co-host Chris Saunders and I over at A Most Horrible Library talked at length about that an episode or two ago. But this book has been my favorite by far, and I've liked the other two as well. Lemire had said you're going to start kind of getting some answers, and so far, I don't think you're going to get answers so much as you're going to get a better idea of what we're dealing with, the kind of overall tapestry, where I think the other two books were thin slices. I really like this book. It's a handful of people who live in this old tenement building, and there's an old man who disappears. They go into his apartment and then find, basically, for lack of a better way to say it, but kind of oversimplifying, a gateway to a different place. They encounter some really messed up stuff. And as usual, I'll put in some insert shots here, but Andrea Sorrentino has this way, if you read Gideon Falls, you'll recognize this. He has this way of doing art that kind of does graphically what Grant Morrison does verbally. So what I mean by that is he does stuff with the panels and the page and the way the panels relate to the page and the characters in the panels on the page. It kind of breaks dimensional qualities that I have not seen comics do before. The only thing that comes to mind is that 3D Superman comic that Morrison did, and I can't remember the artist right now, but there was some stuff like this in that. But man, this is just a dark, dingy story, and it is absolutely gorgeous. absolutely in love with it. Great horror comic. If you dig horror comics, Lemire is at the top of the pile right now, up there with Tinian. Just really good stuff. And every week or every month, I can't wait to read this book. Staying with the horror, we've got James Tinian and Lissandro Estherren's Nightmare Country, The Glass House. So this is a Sandman Presents book. There's been tons of these Sandman Presents books. And, they first launched that maybe 2018, 2019. Neil Gaiman did a big announcement. DC rolled out a Lucifer book. The Dreaming, maybe. I don't know. There were a handful of books. I read a couple of them for a while. They were good. Didn't really, I don't know. It still just felt tacked on to the Sandman thing. And I'm telling you, James Tinian, the guy, he is great. And that's a hard one assessment. Initially, I was a little bit skeptical just because there was so much praise. But man, he won me over eventually. Really, just in the last year, I've really started reading pretty much everything. Department of Truth, Something is Killing the Children. I don't really care about House of Slaughter too much. He's not writing that. But Glass House. So this series basically follows the Corinthian. There's a bunch of other Sandman / the Dreaming characters that weave in and out. Lucian's there. Thessaly, however you say it, has just come into it. A couple other, which I won't spoil. There's a big plot. There's a big scheme going on that's being designed by somebody that they've just recently revealed. And really, especially, I believe they revealed it in the last issue, but they really play with it this time. And we haven't seen the full extent of that plan, that agenda, but the Corinthians caught up in it, Thessaly's caught up in it, and all these other innocent bystanders. And it feels like the first two trades of the original Sandman series, Dollhouse especially. The art, sometimes I feel like the art confuses me a little bit, or it kind of, I don't know, I really like it. It reminds me of back near the end of the original Sandman series. Mark Hempel, I believe, did parts of the Kindly ones or the Kindly ones, however you say that. And this reminds me of that. It's a little bit less precise, but it still really works in the context of the Sandman universe because we've kind of already got a pedigree visually of what we need. Like longtime readers, this will feel at home to you visually, even though I feel like sometimes there's a few things where I'm like, well, it feels a little rushed or whatever. That's just nitpicking. Overall, this book has been fantastic. I don't really know so there was a Nightmare Country and there were 5 or 6 issues of that. Then they stopped and they waited, they took the hiatus, and then they came back and it was Nightmare Country, The Glass House. This is going to end in, I think, another month. And then I don't know if it's going to come back. I don't really know what the plan for this is. I hope it keeps going, but I also hope it doesn't overstay its welcome. I'm pretty sure it won't based on what we've seen from Tinian so far. New Ghost Rider. Again, definitely this issue has me kind of thinking about dropping it again. It wasn't terrible, but I kind of hem and haw with it. I'm going to stick around for a while. I still haven't read that annual from last week. And then TMNT, this is the ongoing IDW series. It's the only one in that universe that I read. It's number 144. I'm not going to talk about it because I haven't read like the last 2. This happens with this book once in a while. I get behind and then I'll just sit and read like 3 or 4 in a row. That's going to happen pretty soon. But as usual, this is a fantastic book. And the longevity that they've been able to mine with these characters has been absolutely fantastic. I don't know. I have such respect for Kevin Eastman and the way that he chooses his contributors and the way that I feel like there's a lot of care given to this legacy and to really continuing the series and not beating a dead horse. Like there's always something new, but not at the expense of alienating longtime fans. So yeah, I need to really jump back in on this and get caught up. Okay, finally, talk about the best book I read last week, and that's X-Men Red number 16. So I don't have a lot of experience with the whole Araco thing. I read House and Powers. I read the first trade of the Hickman stuff. And then I picked up, like I said last week, about Planet Size X-Men #1. And so what I know I've gotten from Sword and then from this. So there, I have a bit of a disconnect. However, it's not in any way, shape, or form affecting my enjoyment of this book. This book is awesome. This book, so the whole current storyline, Araco is at war because Genesis, who is Apocalypse's wife, never experienced this character before in anything else I read. Basically shows up and says, Storm and the Great Ring, which is kind of like the Quiet Council of Araco, they've gone soft. They're moving towards peaceful ways. Araco is a very warrior-based society, so she's waging war. Now, one of the things I loved about this book, so back in the summer, the X-Books did this crossover with the Eternals. I'm not an Eternal fan. I could not care less. And at Judgment Day, I'm sure some of you read it. It was better than I thought that it was going to be. I read the main books. I didn't read any of the Eternal tie-in stuff if I could help it. I'm just not a fan. However, the storyline was pretty good and they utilize them well. And the Eternal I am a fan of is Uranus, who is Thanos' grandfather. And basically, this dude wiped out most of the population of Araco. He shows up and just kills everything and everyone in sight. So in the outcome of Judgment Day, the Eternals took him, put him in his dimensional prison or whatever it is, and then gave this thing to the Iraqi as like a peace offering and said, this is the Uranus trigger. If you are ever in need of his skills, his power, you just push this. He will show up for 1 hour, do what he does, wipe everything out, and then he'll leave. So this start early in this book, this character, SZA of the Smoke, she's kind of like a night crawler. Pointed tail, seems to teleport. She shows up and she basically goes for the Uranus trigger. And there's this whole thing where she kind of falls under sway of Uranus and he cuts to him and he's talking to her and then like basically very subtly trying to convince her like, yes, you want to do this. And then her compatriot then it's like, hey, where'd you go? You were somewhere else. And then for the rest of the book, they weave in little snippets where you kind of wonder, like, are they going to use this? And the end of this book, Apocalypse shows up. Now I feel like the last issue or two, I think it was 2 issues ago, they had him on the cover. And I keep waiting, like, okay, his wife is waging war. Where the hell is Apocalypse? He shows up at the very end. And I'm like, holy shit, are we about to see Apocalypse versus Uranus? Now, I get the impression from the little I know of, I mean, Apocalypse I've encountered as far back as Louise Simonson's X Factor, like early. So like 80s, mid 80s. But he's really become, they've added to him through the years. So I'm unfamiliar with exactly how powerful he is, I think, but I know he's powerful. And the idea of him facing off with Uranus in the next issue in X-Men Red, that's my prediction. And if that is what number 17 is, holy shit, folks, it's going to be awesome. So yeah, so that was it. So I'll be back next week with more comics. In the interim, I have a show with Chris Saunders, former Drinking with Comics co-host, called The Most Horrible Library. I mentioned that earlier. I also do a horror genre podcast called The Horror Vision. Check that out if you're in the horror. And it's basically a weekly show. And otherwise, I'll be back next week. Until then, cheers. Hi, I'm Sean. Join me and my friends every week for The Horror Vision, where we talk about horror movies.
A pandemic of violence floods the streets of major cities as cases of the media-dubbed murder virus MV20 soar, causing those infected to go on killing sprees. Caught in the middle, police detective Angela Miller finds her only trustworthy ally in the self-proclaimed psychic PI, Gerald Henry. As the two try to navigate the violence, they are drawn into New Age guru Abramelin Harvest's plot to heal the planet. Harvest's missive?
The world is sick, and humanity is the infection.
The cure? Murder. From the twisted mind of Sean C. Baker, author of A Collection of Desires and Shadowplay in Book 1, Kim and Jesse, comes his most vicious novel yet,